Hey everyone, just wanted to give you a quick heads up. The second Global Product Owner Summit is coming soon. You can get all the details at bit.ly/Product Owner 2024. That's bit.ly/Product Owner 2024. And it's all lowercase, all one word. Oh, and stick with us until the end of the episode to know the dates and the tracks that we have for you in this year's summit. But for now, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a bonus episode here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we talk about no estimates for product people. And we have with us today from the Netherlands, Maryse Meinen. Hey, Maryse, welcome to the show.
Yay! I'm happy to be here, Vasco. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Maryse is a product owner dedicated to fostering experimentation, agility, and empathy within organizations. She builds and facilitates great teams, coaches leaders, and believes in simplicity and human-centric methodologies. With expertise in lean and agile development and a passion for teaching, she shapes adaptive and learning-focused cultures. So, Maryse, that was a short intro. Tell us a bit more about yourself and how did you come to experiment with no estimates?
Well, that's a nice question and a very good introduction, Vasco. So there is hardly anything I would add, apart from you ended with a passion for teaching, which indeed I do have. I think it's a bit of the lean management style that you want to be a teacher, a leader. So that's actually, I was into lean before I got into agile. So this is where I picked this up, that if you want to build teams, help teams, facilitate teams, you also need to be able to teach them. So I really try to adopt that in everything I do. So I've been around lean and agile for a while, and this is also bridging to how I came into contact with No Estimates, because my first ever international conference, now this sounds as if I'm such an experienced conference goer, which I'm totally not. But back in the days, I think it feels like 1872, I was at Lean Agile Scotland, which is, by the way, a fabulous conference to attend. And I was there totally inexperienced, feeling like a little girl looking around me. What am I doing here? How did I end up here? And then I got into contact with Seb Rose. And Seb, at that point, did a workshop on no estimates. And little did I know, I had never heard of no estimates. I hadn't been following that was a big thing, that there was whole Twitter wars raging about the no estimate movement. I really didn't know anything about it, but I had a nice conversation with Seb. He made me feel comfortable in this international conference where I felt like a little girl, and I thought, oh, what the heck, I'll just attend his workshop. So I was sat down there and taken along in a wonderful session by Seb, in which he introduced that no estimates isn't really about estimates. And then I was totally lost. So he got me there. And I remember till today that there was a little quiz in his workshop that was about, I can't remember, in preparation for this podcast interview, I tried to look it up, but it is so long ago that I couldn't find my notes of this workshop. But then he asked us in a little quiz, something like, what is the distance from Earth to the moon? I don't know if that was the precise question, but it was something similar like that. And I didn't have a bloody clue. Now, in the quiz, there were four possible answers, one of them being, I don't know. And of course, I didn't say, I don't know. I guessed something which was far next to what it actually was. And this was the whole point, of course, of this quiz in this wonderful workshop, because actually none of us knew. Well, there was someone who actually had the right answer, but most of us didn't know. But none of us, or hardly any one of us, actually said, I don't know. So that was, for me, that was the enlightening moment of this workshop, thinking, well, I don't know, I didn't know. And why on earth did I decide to just guess something while I was perfectly aware I didn't know? So that was my first introduction to the whole no estimates concept, thanks to Seb, and that has stuck with me ever since.
This reminds me that as we record this, there's all the rage about AI and large language models, and one of the defects that those models have is that they always have an answer, even when they don't know. And what you just said reminds me that humans suffer from the same problem.
Yeah,
we always have an
absolutely.
answer, even when we don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and then imagine, because this was a workshop setting with all people, well, some of them probably knew each other, but it was there was no reason to pretend that I'd know. Imagine how that would be in a team. Of course, in a very safe team, you might hope that that wouldn't be the case, but in many teams, there would be some sort of peer pressure that you would have to, you look around and you think other people will see, well, they seem to know what they're estimating. So you sort of feel pressured into estimating something as well, even if you don't know. So this really stuck with me. It was a wonderful workshop and a wonderful example. And I started experimenting with it as soon as I could in different settings. And I still really like the whole concept, and I still really am a big supporter of it.
So, share with us a specific example. So, you started from that workshop, as you said, newly going to new or as a new conference attendee, being exposed to what was at the time, I don't know the year this was, but if there was a Twitter war raging. Definitely, for many years there was a Twitter war raging on the no estimates topic. Yeah. I remember that. It was definitely a controversial topic, but for people who were not emotionally invested one way or the other, it was also an enlightening topic, as you just demonstrated. Yeah. Can you share with us a specific example when you applied no estimates and how it went, what you gained from it?
Yeah, there's actually several examples. But I think one of the best examples is, I'm not sharing the name of this client, but one of my recent teams that was a new team, and they were going to build a relatively new infrastructure solution. And we decided, together with the small team, we decided to just don't do estimates. So we decided to do refinements and talk about the items we were going to pick. We actually did the CCC, so we had a bit of a description, we had a good conversation, and then we wrote down the confirmation, when would we be satisfied with, the implementation of the solution. And then there is this tool that this organization also used. Let's not get into a war on tooling, but it sort of obliged us to actually fill in an estimation. We couldn't continue the refinement of the stories if we didn't click in what the estimation in story points would be. And then we decided, well, let's use this to our advantage. This is a really nice example. So we decided to give every story that we did refine a 1 and every story that we hadn't refined yet as a 0. So this is how we used the tooling to our advantage, in the sense that we could easily see where we were in the process of refinement, which was a continuous process in the case of this team. So we decided to talk about complexity of items, of how big it was. And then, of course, at some point, we started realizing not all things are equal, but also not in size and complexity. So we sort of said, well, then now this is going to be difficult if we want to have some sort of idea of what we can actually realize in a sprint. So we should find a way to figure out how to estimate what we might be able to do in a sprint. So we decided to start working with making them smaller. I myself am not a very tall person, so I've always liked make it small, or keep it small. So we decided to start working with cutting the items, slicing them as small as we could. We already did that, but in this no estimate idea, we said, well, let's try and make them as small as reasonably possible. Not too small, of course, still functional, customer-centered items. So we started working with making them smaller, and in that sense, being able to say, well, by now we know that if this is our sprint goal, and this is what we need to realize the sprint goal, these items is what we need, and we can roughly do 10 items every sprint.
When you started to do that slicing, is what you called it, I imagine that you started doing that. I don't know, but I would like to get your understanding. I imagine that you started doing the slicing because somebody said, well, but these items are not really comparable to each other. So how can we say that we can do this and not that? Is that how it happened? Is that what triggered the whole slicing conversation?
No, it's a very, very, thank you for this question, Vasco. No, what actually happened, not so much the comparable, even though in my role as a product person, that was important for me. Like, how can we say that we can do this and we can't do that? But what actually triggered is I think I already mentioned, this was an infrastructure team. And as a product owner in an infrastructure team, a sentence you hear all the time is, no, this is far too big. This won't fit in a sprint. This won't fit in a sprint goal. This will take far too long or far longer than a sprint rhythm will allow. So we started conversations about how can we cut things up in such a way that they still deliver value. And we started experimenting with, well, as you would do with any software team, when you start talking about real functional items and, well, really let's say the philosophy of Scrum and Agile, that you have to deliver something of value in every time box. But this is a relatively new concept in infrastructure. So people really struggle with how can I make it in such a way that we deliver value each sprint. So that was actually the trigger of the conversation. It's too big. We can't fit that in one sprint.
I really like that because it illustrates also one part which I think is very important, this idea of what value means for a particular team. And in infrastructure, it's even more clear that value isn't, for example, a complete releasable, production-ready piece of code. It can be a bunch of other things. It can be a proof of concept for a small performance improvement. It can be a new database API, even though you might not have changed the database yet, and that's the next step you want to do. Exactly. Or whatever there might be. Risk reduction is also a critical value item when you're developing something that is like infrastructure, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was also, it was actually a very hip and trendy team. It was an honor to work with them, but they were infrastructure as code. So that's how they worked. The next team I got to work with did that as well. So in that sense, at least it's not as it was before that you really had to change the things in the hardware too. We had to, but that was a relatively small portion of what we did. So we could still release each sprint. And that's really what we strive to do. And actually we manage most of the time. But it's a different type of, well, as you say, it's a different type of value. But you need to also have this customer perspective. Now, in this sense, in these teams, the customer wasn't the outside customer. Although in the end, of course, if things went down, the outside customer would notice. But mostly it was other teams that needed our platforms to work on. But still, what we started doing, but that's not what this session is about, but we started doing is talking to the other teams, bring engineers into the teams, with talking to other engineers directly, and then seeing what they would need and what value would mean for them. So that's how that shift got about.
Yeah, absolutely. Also a great example of what cross-functional product ownership is all about, because specifically in this case, it really is the people who have the technical understanding that need to go out and understand what the client teams need so that they can provide ideas and ultimately prioritize their work. Now, implementing NoEstimates isn't always necessarily easy, and sometimes it can be quite a challenge or frustration. So I don't know if it happened in this team or any other team, Maryse, but share with us, what was the hardest challenge, frustration, or obstacle that you faced when implementing NoEstimates with your teams?
Yeah, you can see me smiling because, of course, I was already expecting this question. And I'm also going to give you an answer that I might not make friends over, but I am going to be bloody honest anyway. Inexperienced Scrum Masters. Now, people are never an obstacle. I've been taught that, and I do believe that. People are never the problem. However, when it came to NoEstimates, very often you read that management could be a problem and people have some resistance against it. In my experience, the teams are never the problem. On the contrary, they're usually quite happy to let go of this, well, what one of my teammates once calls this useless estimating. I'm just coming up with something because otherwise my product owner won't be satisfied. So usually the teams are definitely not, in my experience, definitely not where the resistance comes from. Also, in my experience, maybe because in the product owner position, it's different. I had no troubles with management or stakeholders. Maybe that has to do with the way how we managed expectations to management and stakeholders. But I had some serious problems with Scrum Masters, usually people who hadn't been around for that long. I'm going to be really unkind here, but this really was a challenge. People who'd, I don't know, just got their certification, have an idea what Scrum is, and we all need to start that journey. Yeah? I have no judgment on itself, but then they would say, no, but Maryse, we need to do estimations. And I said, well, that's, of course we do. We need to have a rough idea, a guesstimate of what we think we might be able to do to reach our sprint goal. Of course we do. Yeah, but we need to do this with story points. Well, no, we don't. And that has been a real challenge. Also, as I mentioned, there was the Scrum Master who set up the tooling we needed that kind of obliged us to fill in story points. And of course, we found a way around it. That was that team. But in the latest team I worked with, I'd been talking to the also infrastructure teams, and we decided it would be a good idea to just make everything small and see what we could fit in a sprint. And then there was a Scrum Master who said, no, we really need to do this with the proper way of planning poker, and we need to fill in the story points. So that was, and I'm not so good at banging my fist at the table, so that was a difficult discussion to get.
I can totally understand that some people just want to follow certain practices that they've learned and maybe they've had success with, of course, because that's also a possibility. When you think about this type of objection coming from, in this case, a Scrum Master, how do you react to it? Like in your role as a product owner, let's say if you had a time machine and you were able to go back and replay that story again, what would you have done differently?
That's another good question. You're really good at asking good questions. I'm not sure if I could have done this any differently, because in this particular situation, this was really an inexperienced Scrum Master. So it wasn't, this person hadn't had a positive experience with planning poker. It was just that this person thought this is what was necessary to do it well. So it was a perfectly good intention. It just took some time. And it took me some time explaining what NoEstimates is, and that it wasn't really about NoEstimates, and what I think the value is in not estimating, but really sticking to, well, you can't really know since there is more unknown than known, so it's a guess anyway. So it took me some time sort of instilling the idea of thinking in bets, so to speak. It's all a big bet, so we can't know. So there is no real value in the relative estimation in story points or gummy bears or whatever. So it mostly took time. And looking back, I still think, well, I think it just needed time. So there wouldn't have been a magical sentence or something I could have done that would suddenly have swapped the mind of this Scrum Master, and there were more Scrum Masters. It just took some time. It took some, well, explanation and some letting it sink in, giving these Scrum Masters the time to actually, well, develop their own thinking around no estimates. So patience was, I think, the patience and explanation, teaching was, I think, the magical wand here.
So one technique that I've used in the past as a coach is that when I work with the team, we go through the slicing. That's something that I think is very useful, no matter whether you then estimate or not. Absolutely. And specifically slicing out risk or value, because reduction of risk is also one aspect of value. And but it is, of course, significantly different from a perspective of who is implementing, because we might be removing technical risk, or we might be removing business risk, and so on. There's different types of risk there. But what I've done in the past is, when we get to the moment of the estimates, I leave the room. I say, you are welcome to do the estimates, but because I don't need to have that conversation with you, you are welcome to do it in my absence. Right? And if you want to use the estimates to update the tool, then you just do that. And of course, I never use that data because I think it drives us in error. And based on my own research, in fact, counting the number of stories is even more accurate than using story points. Yeah. So I make it very clear that they are free to do it. And if that's how they think it should be done, they should do it. But that I am not part of it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea. It reminds me of that I sometimes, I really believe in shared product ownership. And you mentioned that somewhere at the beginning of the interview. I'm not a techie. By now, I've been around infrastructure teams for a while, so I know my stuff, but I'm not a hardcore techie. And we've always wondered if that was an advantage or a disadvantage. But I found out over the years that actually it's a huge advantage, because I do need to step back. I don't know. And it's the techie people who have the best ideas, of course, about how to implement problems we're trying to solve for our customers. So one thing I've also learned over time is not to be present always. I'm always available for the team. I always craft a, let's say, potential sprint goal, an idea of what problem I think is most pressing that we should be solving for our customers now, and on the long term in the product roadmap. So I always craft the sprint goal. And then, of course, I make a, let's say, a concept sprint goal, and of course, we craft it together. But what has happened, and what works really well, is sometimes I only bring in the sprint goal. The team crafts it together, and then I leave the room because the team can decide for themselves what they would need to realize the sprint goal, what they would need to make this happen. And that is not so much as only leaving for the estimation, which I think is a brilliant idea. But I've done this, and that worked really well, to just say, okay, this is what I think we should solve. Do we agree? We craft the sprint goal together. And then I said, well, I have to go. You figure out for yourselves what you need to do this. And so that's a bit of a similar idea. And teams have said over and over again, and people are still reaching out to me, that they really like that it's, I felt very lazy sometimes, thinking, I'm just going away, but the teams really appreciated it, and they felt ownership for what they were going to do in the next sprint. So it's a bit of the same, same idea, tip. I'd say. Yeah.
Brilliant tip for sure. Right. That when you think about the times where you applied no estimates, how do you think that approach, the no estimates approach, impacted the way the teams plan and prioritize their work?
Well, I've given you a bit of an insight in what happened in some teams. But when it comes to planning, I think, well, in the latest teams I worked with, the big struggle was implementing this whole idea of value-focused, well, working with sprint goals, and all sprints together would work to a product goal. So there was the struggle of really getting that in their heads, sort of, that are we solving actual problems for actual people instead of just technical issues to pick up? So there, the planning was mostly difficult because they had the feeling they were just ticking boxes. Oh, this is something we need to do. This is something we need to do. This is something we need to do. And when we started when we started letting go of the estimates, people started really thinking more about what is it we actually do? What is the value we deliver? So I think the biggest change that came about is that the focus went to value instead of ticking boxes. We need to do items. That is when I came in, that is what most teams did at this latest assignment. Most of them said, we just, the sprint goal is finish all items. So the move to no estimates, among other things, it was not just the no estimates, but it changed that we started looking at real value for real people. I mean, it's these other teams, these other teams that are using our infrastructure. And one of the things that helped in that shift was the no estimates move.
How do you think, like when you look back and reflect on it, how do you think that happened, that shift happened? Like, of course, it wasn't just because you dropped no estimates. It was because of that and
the focus on the sprint goals, or at least the product goals, really thinking what problem are we trying to solve here? So the focus on our customers, other teams, other people that work near us, they have issues with things. They have challenges, they have problems. So what problems are we solving? So really the shift in it's actual people and they're actually using what we're building. So the product focus, I'd say, because all of this is sort of entangled with the product. Instead of thinking in projects, it's thinking in products. We're actually building something over time that is actually helping our customers do their work better. So I'd say it's the no estimates, it's making things smaller, and it is helping your teams, the people in your team, seeing that they're doing actual valuable work for actual people. Because many of the infrastructure teams also feel, infrastructure teams have been in the cellar for a long time, literally. Often they're in the basement. And that has made them feel over time as if they're just the people in the basement. So one of the other things I think that we did is make it, we literally at the other team I mentioned, we moved them from the basement to the fourth floor, literally. Even though then some of them said, "Oh, we're far away from the server room. That's scary." But that made a difference because suddenly they were visible. Other teams saw them. But what started happening over time is that engineers started to walk into the infrastructure room, and then an infrastructure engineer would say, "Oh, I'm not sure about this. Shall I?" And then he just walked into the other team's room and had a discussion about it. So it's also been about valuing what these infrastructure teams do and showing them that what they deliver has, as I mentioned before, it's a repetition, sorry, that they do actual work that actually does matters to actual people that do their actual work. So it's also been a revaluing of their work, sort of.
In that context, I think an important question is how then did you measure progress? Because of course now you're not looking necessarily at how many story points you deliver. So how do you measure progress and how do you communicate that to your stakeholders?
Problems solved. So what we did is, crafting sprint goals that were solving people's problems. At what one of these teams had they had infrastructure problems. This was let's say a database related to something on the website. So let's say a front end website, and it went down far too often. So we decided this was too big a problem to start solving just all at once. So we started saying, well, the first thing would be, this is just an example, but what if we started with saying, well, we can't solve the problem entirely immediately, but let's start saying, we'll put up a message on the website that if it goes down, at least you know what's happening. So this is a way we started cutting up the problem in small challenges. So the big, huge, hairy problem in small problems. So in a story map session, we said, well, these are the first problems we need to solve now. And then every problem became a sprint goal. This is also what I communicated with the other teams, so with my stakeholders and with management. And then bit by bit, we started solving problems, and thereby, that's how we communicated progress, solved problems.
That's a really beautiful story of how you can transform the conversation into a value conversation rather than how many story points or how many tasks you've completed. I think one of the most dangerous phrases for a software development team to use is "we're working on it." Yeah. Because it doesn't say anything. No matter how many story points you've done, if you're still working on it, there's still no value delivered. And I think that that's also one of the core aspects of NoEstimates, which is really to bring the conversation back to those problems we're solving for someone, right? The value we're delivering for someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think in the infrastructure teams, I think the biggest change, that's referring back to a question you asked before, but the biggest change was in making the engineers in these infrastructure teams see that they did actually deliver value instead of being in the basement and just doing something that nobody would ever notice anyway. I mean, infrastructure is a commodity, so people just assume I turn it on and it works. But, there's actual hard work there.
There's a lot of work that goes into making a commodity work, that's for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
So looking back at all of those stories, what advice would you give a team that is considering at the moment switching to use NoEstimates?
Very simple advice, I'd say, but like anything, it's much easier said than done. But just do it. Start experimenting with it. Don't take it on as a too big, hairy problem, but start small. Try for once what happens if you, for example, do the 0-1 estimation. So at least you can say, yes, we've estimated it, it's a 1, and everything will be a 1. But try experimenting with cutting things down. What happens if you make them smaller? Could you try and just maybe for a sprint or for a time box or whatever rhythm it is you're working in? This, of course, doesn't only work with Scrum, it works in every cyclic development idea. So take a small step, try it out, and just see what happens if you leave out the estimation, or maybe you make them all similar to start with if you don't want to let go of the estimation straight away. And I think a sensible advice is get some help. Because I've been telling you the last half hour at the honor of talking to you, and it all sounds as if it all was rather wonderful, and as if I did very well, and it was all fun. But that's not actually true. I mean, it was a tough journey, and at points I was almost on the verge of a breakdown, because it's hard work, and it's continuous effort, and it's continuous teaching, and it's continuous explanation. And every time you think you're making a step, and then someone comes up with, oh no, but we forgot the estimations. We need to do this. And then suddenly the poker cards come back on the table after all. So it's a continuous effort. So if there is any advice I'd give people is get some help, get some support, find a Agile coach or a Scrum master who's actually done some of this and ask them for help and support. Because that really makes a difference, that you're not walking this road alone. I had wonderful engineers in the team who had been experienced in NoEstimates before, and that really saved my, I was going to say ass, but I guess that's a forbidden word.
That's fine, that's fine, don't worry about it.
No, but that really saved my, sort of life, and at least the joy in things, because I had people who knew how this worked and, helped me tag along. So that really would be my advice. Find some help, find some support, and start small. Like with anything, just start small.
So, talking about getting some help, of course, we could get an Agile coach or Scrum Master or somebody with experience in this to help us out. But for those of us who want to dive into the topic further, what's one resource you'd recommend for our listeners that are starting perhaps to consider jumping into NoEstimates?
Oh, I suddenly already thought, oh no, that's what he's going to ask next. And then I have no answer. I really don't know, actually, because, well, this is going to sound really arrogant, but because I've been around this for such a long time, I actually wouldn't know. I would assume, well, it used to be Twitter where you could find the good things, but I'm assuming by now, well, it's X anyway, but that's long past. As we said, I think the wars are over on this matter. I would always assume, yeah, to just look it up. And then, well, of course, you need to be careful of who you look for. I'm not sure if Seb Rose and probably Alan Kelly are still people who are around the NoEstimates. And I'm assuming my podcast host today also did some work on NoEstimates. So I would always assume if you start Googling for things, you'll find stuff, and then be careful of what you read. Well, careful in the sense of, I mean, there's protagonists and people are against it. But if you're really interested into diving into NoEstimates, I'd suggest some of these names. So probably some of your work too, Vasco. But I'm sure you can elaborate more on this than I can.
We'll definitely put the link to Seb Rose and Alan Kelly's work. Alan Kelly's done amazing work also on a sister hashtag called No Projects.
Yes.
More on that in his book, No Projects, of course. But I'll put the link to those. Definitely, there's a lot of a huge body of knowledge around this topic. So thank you for reminding us, Maryse. We're getting close to the end, Maryse, but before we go, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Actually, LinkedIn. I'm trying to be not so much on, well, let's say digital means. So I'm trying to cut down on my footprint in digital presence. So LinkedIn would be the way to go.
Absolutely.
I'm not on Twitter, not on X, not on anything else, not on Facebook, which I would recommend for professional purposes anyway. But I'm not on any of these things. So LinkedIn is the way to go.
Absolutely. We'll put the link on the show notes so that people can easily find Maryse. And why not ask a few follow-up questions? I'm sure she would love to continue the conversation. Maryse, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Yeah, well, thanks a million. Thanks for having me. And I had great fun. And thanks for your great questions, Vasco.
Hi there, Agile friends. Thank you for sticking around and listening to the details of the Product Owner Summit, this year's global summit dedicated to a critical Scrum role, the product owner role, of course. We'll have some amazing keynotes and 4 tracks filled with first-hand stories and experiences for product owners to learn more about that critical Scrum role. The summit will take place between April 23rd and 25th, so book your calendars. There will be loads of sessions for you to attend. One of the keynotes will be Dave West, the product owner and CEO at Scrum.org, one of the largest Scrum organizations in the world. If you want to know more, check out the details at bit.ly/product owner 2024. That's all one word, all lowercase, bit.ly/product owner 2024. We will also have 4 tracks. The 4 tracks will cover cross-functional product ownership. That's track 1. As Pixar's Ratatouille said, not every idea can be a great idea, but a great idea can come from anywhere. And this quote emphasizes the importance of a product owner being open to all ideas, regardless of the source, and also challenges us to focus on getting good ideas from everywhere and involving the whole team in the product owner role and responsibilities. The second track is Designing Products for Growth, where we explore how to craft products ready for scalable growth, merging practical strategies with innovation. The idea here is to learn to design products for growth, whether it is sales or customer acquisition. The third track is Know Your Users, user-centric approaches for Agile development. In this track, we learn to master user-centric techniques in Agile development, to deeply understand customer needs and transform insights into meaningful UX designs that focus on engagement and satisfaction. This is a track ideal for innovation-focused Agile teams. And the fourth track, one of the most exciting tracks in my opinion, is product development with AI, ideas for product owners. Not only do we discuss about using AI in the products, but also AI for product owners to learn to make a bigger impact with the help of the AI tools that we already have. The Product Owner Summit will also present to you great opportunities to network with your peers. So get your ticket and join our Slack. You can get the ticket and join the Slack at bit.ly/Product Owner 2024. As always, we have free tickets and also the paid tickets that help to support this podcast. So check them out at bit.ly/Product Owner 2024. That's all lowercase, all one word, Product Owner 2024. I'll see you in the summit floor.